for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, could you read our mission statement?
Marshall Public Schools develops the potential of each learner for success in a changing world.
Thank you. Approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion? And we need a second.
I'll second.
It's open. Anybody add anything? Now's the time. Hearing none, please vote. The agenda is approved. Public forum. Is anybody in the public that would like to approach the board? Now is your time.
Now's your chance, Jenny.
We'll move on to our presentation, Truth in Taxation. Mr. Lamprick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be with you again this evening for the 2015 Truth in Taxation presentation. We'll make this as informative as possible and as painless as possible. How's that? All right. It's something that we're required to do, and it needs to be held from November 24th, between November 24th and December 28th at 6 p.m. or later. Following that to the T, requires that we present information in regards to our current year budget and actual revenue and expenses from last year. Talk about increases, decreases, and the reasons for those either increases or decreases. And then we must allow time for the public to comment. And in this case right now, that would be for you to comment or any questions that you might have. Our agenda, we're going to provide background, or I'm going to provide background on school funding, tax levies, and budgets. Talk about our district budget, information on the district's proposed tax levy, and then again, time for public comments and questions. Public education remains strong in Minnesota. Most recent information, 78% of Minnesota high school graduates in 2015 took the ACT, compared with 59% nationally, so that's good. Minnesota's average composite score was 22.7, which is the highest in the nation of the 30 states in which more than half of the college-bound students took the ACT in 2015. So Minnesota has led the nation for 10 consecutive years. The national composite score is 20.9. Marshall's composite score for 2015 was 23.2. So that's reflects very well on what we're doing here in Marshall. Any questions in regards to ACT scores? The legislature is constitutionally bound to provide a general and uniform system of public schools, and they have been doing that since the late 1800s and continue to do that into the 2000s.
The 2000s?
2015, Karen.
Okay.
School district funding is highly regulated by the state. There isn't a lot of things that you as a school board or we as administration can do in regards to funding. The state sets the formulas, they set the tax policy, what can be the maximum amount that you can levy in a particular year. And the only thing that really you can do in regards to changing the revenues or the amount of revenues is by going out or having a bond referendum, a building bond referendum, or an operating referendum. Those are really kind of two of the very few limited options that school districts have as far as changing revenue. Most of everything else highly regulated by the state of Minnesota. Since 2003, the state general education revenue formula has not kept pace with inflation. You'll see a slide here next that will show what's happened. We had good news in the state legislature, the 2015 legislature, as there was a 2% increase on the general education formula for both this current year of 15-16 and for 16-17, which translates into $117 per pupil unit for FY 2016 and $119 additional for FY 2017. Again, not keeping pace, the per pupil allowance for fiscal year 2017 would need an increase of $626, that's 10.3%, to have kept pace with inflation. And so you can see here, this is the adjusted amount for inflation. $6,693 is where it should be for 2017. And here's the actual adjusted in pupil weighting, $6,067. That's that difference that was talked about before of $626. So if in a perfect world, what the legislature should do to remain and be able to keep up with inflation is give another $626, and we know that that is something that's not going to happen, not past legislative sessions and not in future ones. And as a result, what's happened is that there is a growing reliance, and I mean really there is a reliance on operating referendums. Our other funding sources, like for special education capital funds, have not kept pace with inflation. The cost of providing FY14 special education programs on the average is 40% underfunded, or $5,222 per special education student. We have dollars for regular program operations that are used to subsidize the special education program. We've talked about that before, the cross-subsidy. That's been a fact of life for forever. So really what school districts have to do to balance the budget are either to cut budgets or increase operating referendum revenue. Most districts, including this district, have done that over the past number of years. That's just an ongoing thing that school districts need to do. Here's some referendum trends that have occurred. In 1993, 65% of districts had referendum revenue averaging $332 per pupil unit. For 2016, 99.4% of districts have referendum revenue plus local optional revenue. That's that new programming that took place here in the previous legislative sessions, averaging $1,141 per pupil unit. And that $1,141 is 19.2% of the general education formula allowance, so almost 20% of the formula allowance occurs with referendum revenue authority of that $1,141 average. And of that $1,141, $758 is board approved or voter approved, and the remainder is $383 is local optional revenue. So tonight we're doing 2015 levy for payable 2016, which is the 2016-2017 school year or fiscal year 2017. And again, tax levy is based on a variety of state-determined formulas plus voter-approved referendums. Some of the increases in tax levies become neutral because they're offset by reductions in state aid. If there's a state aid component with the levy, a lot of times what happens if the levy increases, the state aid portion of it decreases and vice versa. The expenditure budget is limited by state set revenue formulas, voter approved levies, fund balance, and it's not just tax levies. So there's a number of components that come into play in regards to setting a budget. So tax levies is just one of those components. The school district cycle for tax levy is different than the cities and counties. The cities and counties for this tax levy period that's taking place right now, it reflects the budget year. So they run their budgets from January 1st through December 31st. Here for a school district, it's, as you're well aware of, July 1st through June 30th of the next year. So the 2016 tax levy is going to provide revenue for the 2016-2017 school fiscal year, and our budget will be adopted in June of 2016. Everybody understand that contrast as far as how budgets work along with the tax levy cycle. Okay. And by state law, because of that whole situation, we're only required to provide current year budget information. So that's what you'll see. But we also will contrast that with what our actual numbers were for 14-15. And again, as you're all well aware of, our budgets are divided into separate funds. For our school district, we have 6 main funds: the general fund, food service, community services, capital outlay, debt service, and transportation. We have the construction fund. We also have the OPEB debt service. We've actually kind of combined that into the regular debt service. So there are some other funds involved, but for Marshall Public Schools, just those 6 main funds. Here is the comparison of the 14-15 actual with the 15-16 revised budgets, or the budget that you had approved in October of this year. This is the revenue side of things. 14-15 actual, 15-16 budget amounts for each of the different funds, and then what the percent change is, and then what the total amount change is, which is 3.4%, comparing again 15-16 revised budgets with the 14-15 audited actual numbers. And this is the expenditure comparison. In 14-15 actual as compared to 15-16 revised budget, and then, of course, what the percent change. There's one big number there, capital outlay, because we ended with a good fund balance there, and we have additional revenue funding that we're receiving for capital outlay. We've been aggressive in moving that forward. There's a 46.8% increase. The rest of them are fairly consistent as far as what the expenditure budget is. Our total budget change, looking again at that comparison, is 5.1%, 15-16, as compared to 14-15 actual. And for 15-16, this shows the makeup of our revenue budget, and a great majority is the general fund, 74%, debt service 8%, community services 7%, and so on. But again, for all of the revenues that are coming into the district for 15-16, 74% are for the general fund. That's pretty typical, I think, of most school districts. A lot of numbers here. Basically, this is something that we have to have printed in the local newspaper, in the Independent, which we've done. It basically shows the activity for 2015 in these 3 columns, and then what our actual fund balances were as of June 30th of 2015. And then we look at what the activity is going to be for revenues and expenditures for 2016, and then what our projected fund balances are going to be for all of these different categories. And down below here, no one can see it, but the operating cost per average pupil unit for 2015 was a little less than $12,000, $11,892. That's I think we were very much close to that in the previous year. But again, that is something that we report, and I don't know if the Minnesota Department of Education really takes a look at that because this is more for local consumption through the local newspaper. For 15-16, our general fund revenues by source. Where is the money coming from? Big time from the state. 81% of our general fund revenues, at least projected or budgeted, comes from the state of Minnesota. Property taxes are 10%. That's part of the component. Federal, 4%. And tuition and those type of contracts, 2%. And other local sources, 3%. But again, from the state of Minnesota is a great majority of where our revenues come, at least for the general fund. Our general fund expenditures by program. This again is for 15-16. These are the different programs: administration, support services, regular instruction. Regular instruction, again, is the major component of how our funds are budgeted for to be spent. 47% is what we're projecting. And the second biggest category is exceptional instruction at 19%. See, and the third place here is site buildings and equipment at 12%. So again, that's by program. And then the next slide shows our general fund expenditures by object. And this is the listing of the different objects: salaries and wages, benefits, purchase services, etc. And if you add this big piece of the pie with this smaller piece of the pie, that comes up to be about 82% is salaries, wages, and benefits for the general fund. And that has varied over the years from anywhere from, well, probably 81% to almost as close as 85% of our budget in the general fund is salaries and benefits. Any questions or comments in regards to that? All right. Moving right along, kind of another little agenda piece: determination of the levy and comparing the 15 levy actual to the 2016 proposed. What some specific reasons for changes in the tax levy, and then impact on taxpayers. Every owner of taxable property pays property taxes for the various jurisdictions, like school districts, cities, counties. Each taxing district sets its own tax levy, often based on limits that are in the state law. And then the county is the one that actually is the overseer of this whole tax levy process. They send out the bills, they send out the truth in taxation statement, they collect the taxes, and then the funds, the revenue from the taxes, are distributed back to each of the entities. For school district property taxes, there might be at least 30 different categories. And then, of course, I talked about the levy limits. The state either sets it by state law or it needs to be voter approved. And the Minnesota Department of Education is the one that puts all that information together. And this year, for our 2015 Pay 2016 information, guess how many pages there are this year? 39 pages of formulas, basically. It used to be, I thought 25 pages was long. Now we're up to 39. And so that's part of the simplification process that they've been working on. And that's still a work in progress, I would say. There's really a 7-step process that takes place as determining how taxes are in fact arrived at. I think you've probably seen this slide in previous years. Really, what your role is as the school board is to adopt the proposed levy in September, which you've done, and it's based on the limits that were set in step 5 here. And after a public hearing, which this is what we're talking about is tonight is the public hearing, the board adopts a final levy in December, and we're scheduled to adopt that on December 21st in 2 weeks. The caveat is the final levy cannot be more than the preliminary levy unless you had a successful bond issue or operating referendum that would change what the tax amount would be. And we had neither of those, so what was presented in September has varied, and if you remember, you approve maximum. That allows a little bit of flexibility because a number of changes do, in fact, take place with the Minnesota Department of Education, and we had a number of changes that happened, but basically we follow what the MD calculates, and by the preliminary levying maximum, that gives some flexibility. So here's what's happened so far. September 8th, we received that information. On September 21st, you, the school board, approved the preliminary proposed levy amounts. In mid-November, if you're a property owner in the school district, you would have received the truth in taxation statement. And now tonight we're having our hearing, our tax levy hearing, and then, as I mentioned before, we would look to bring that forward on December 21st at the regular school board meeting. There are quite a number of factors that can cause the tax bill for individual property to increase or decrease from year to year. Of course, if there's a change in the valuation of the property, up or down, that can certainly change how much you're going to pay in taxes. The changes in the total value of the property in the district, and that's one of the things that's happened over the past quite a number of years here in the Marshall School District, that the total net tax capacity continues to increase. So the taxes are spread over a greater number of entities, and that really, in essence, helps everybody as far as you're not having as much of a direct impact with a tax levy increase coming from the school district if there's increase in property valuations and the net tax capacity. And then, of course, the changes in state funding formulas, local needs and costs, voter-approved referendums, and so on. And then what you can't see on this slide down below is changes in class rates and the history of class rate changes. Since, I think, 2012, there have not been any changes in the tax rates for whether it's commercial property or homesteaded property. So that has remained constant. Our 2016 proposed property tax levy is scheduled to increase from 2015, $367,394, or 6.06%. And again, state law requires that we explain the reason for these major increases. And we'll do that here in just a minute, and then we'll highlight, or I'll highlight any decreases, and there's one that I'll just highlight as we go along. Referendum authority, all districts are now authorized up to $724 per pupil unit in referendum revenue, and that's where we're at, is $724. We have the $424 local optional revenue component, and then the $300 referendum component that we needed to get to the $300, and if you recall, I think it was like about $28 or whatever per pupil unit that you approved. It was a local board decision. So we are at $724 per pupil unit. There are 221 school districts with voter referendum authority in excess of that $724. Marshall is not one of them. Just talk a little bit about the long-term facilities maintenance revenue. This was is, I believe, one of the biggest changes that has occurred in recent memory as far as funding for school districts, and especially this is going to have a positive effect on more rural districts as compared to the metro. And we're starting out with FY17 at $193 per pupil unit. We're not quite to that number because if you look at this, if the average age of the district's facilities is less than 35 years, which for Marshall it is, we're getting a little bit less than that 193. I think it's 180 some dollars. But again, it's significant. And then it's scheduled to increase in the next 2 years after. And so it will have a significant impact for us as far as providing help with deferred maintenance and alternative facilities revenue programs, a variety of things. And it is equalized. It's a combination of property tax levies and state aid. At this point right here, for many districts, the program provides substantially more state aid than they received under existing funding formulas, like health and safety being one of those. And this just shows how that funding can be used. And again, over the years, and when we get to that third year where it's increased, that'll be very significant for the Marshall District and for really a lot of districts in the state of Minnesota. So as far as levy changes that are significant, that have taken place. Local optional levy is changing by almost $50,000. That's for general operating expense. And this is really kind of a new category, and what's really kind of driving it at this point in time is our increasing enrollment. So that's one of the areas where we're looking at reasons why we have a 6.06% increase for 15-16 over 14-15. This is one of them. Here's one that's a decrease, and the category is voter-approved debt service, and this is for payments for debt service. And the reason for the decrease is a significant reduction in our debt service levy because of the MDE, Minnesota Department of Education, mandated computation for excess, debt service fund excess. And we actually put more back into that because anticipating one of the payments that we have to make for our energy services contract for our that will come due in May, we want to have more money in our debt service fund. And so even with that change, we still had a decrease of $107,000, almost $108,000. But there is an offset in a number of other categories, one of them long-term facilities maintenance revenue, which shows an increase or change of $123,000. Didn't have that before. Now we have that as a levy component. Various general fund adjustments totals up to be a little bit more than $40,000. There's a number of different categoricals that they adjust from year to year. And for this year, we're looking at, again, a little bit more than $40,000 in changes, which, of course, increases our total levy change in that percent. And then the other major category for the reasons for change increase is our other debt service levy. That changed $226,000, almost $227,000. The use of the funds for the long-term facilities maintenance debt service and to pay the QZAB, Capital Facilities Bond. One of those is coming online, and that's about $94,000. So that is the major area where we're having an increase in our levy amount is with other debt service levy. And I'll just make the statement in regards to impact on individual taxpayers. Every case is different because there's so many different factors as far as valuation and of a property and increases in valuation of a property. I think the best thing to do is take a look at your truth in taxation statement and see what it's saying, not only for school district taxes, but for city and county taxes also. The figures for 2016 are preliminary estimates based on best data available now, and then the final figures could change slightly. And I do have good news. I don't know how many of you maybe saw in the Independent that when the city council met, Ben Marteg, the city administrator, talked about a tax increment financing district that has now been decertified and it's coming back online. It's a Schwann property it's been on tax increment financing since 2000. And what that means is, in essence, we have another taxpayer coming on board. That increases our net tax capacity and how the taxes are spread. So that increase of 6.06%, it won't be totally nullified by any means, but it'll be reduced. We don't have any numbers. The school district right now doesn't have any numbers how that's going to affect things. But again, a net tax capacity is increasing. The property tax impact will decrease. So that is good news, but that has not been calculated into all the information that you've previously seen, but it will have a positive impact for taxpayers. Any questions about that? So that's good news. And here's how our district funds in the three different categories that we have are spent: the general fund, community services fund, and debt service fund. And here are the dollar amounts for each of those areas at this point in time. $3,300,000 for the general fund in tax levy, community service fund, $190.94, and then the debt service fund, $2,926,000. That makes a grand total of $6,000,000, almost $430,000 for our proposed tax levy at this point. This is just showing in those three categories the changes. The general fund is increasing by 8.17%. In 14, pay 15 as compared to 15, pay 16. What that increase or decrease is, and then what the percent change is. And then here's the total amount, 6.06%. And this is just looking at it from a different standpoint, voter-approved levies as compared to all the other school levies. Voter-approved levies actually is dropping a little bit for 2016 as compared to 2015. Other school levies is going up. Again, those are the numbers, 367,394, or 6.06%. Here's a little history of what's happened over the years since 2000. There's been decreases and increases, and I have a slide that'll maybe show a little bit better where the district has been at over the years. But these are the actual numbers of what our levy amount was, and then whether it was an increase or a decrease. And I think I've pointed this out in previous years. Huge increase. That was because of the successful passage of the bond referendum for building a new high school and remodeling this building. And tonight's hearing, nothing about market value. The market values have been determined. If you have a question on how your property is being valued, I think it's in April that they have a hearing where you can come forward and say, I think my house is way overvalued. I'm sure not too many people will come to that hearing and say, my house is way undervalued. But that is an opportunity that's available every year. I think it's around April that happens. And I talked about tax rates and the property tax classes. That really has not changed, again, since Pay 2012. I talked about net tax capacity a number of times here this evening. Property value just set the same amount for each of the three different categories of $200,000, and then looking at what the tax rates are for those different categories. 1% for residential homestead, it's at 2% for commercial industrial, and ag homestead, that's just the land and buildings, land at 1 acre, that's at 0.5. See what the net tax capacity is amount for each of those different categories. Here again is the three different areas: general ed, debt service, and community education. As far as tax levy spending, 51% is the general education area, 46% for debt service, and then 3% on community education. Here's a slide that gives a little bit of history since Pay 2012 through what's proposed for Pay 2016. And I think I just draw your attention to, again, that those three different components using a $150 market value and what the history is for ag land and building. $474 in 2012, and now it's going to be $449 in 2016. Commercial industrial, 872 going down to 829, but there's been fluctuation, as you can see, for all of those different areas. And that makeup of 51%, 46%, and 3%, you can kind of see the same thing right here as we look at the history. This is a slide that comes from schoolfinances.com. This was the slide that I was talking about earlier as far as what has taken place since 2001 in regards to our property taxes in Marshall. And actually, they've been pretty level, really, since 2003. Here is a comparison with other regional centers. I guess that's how I would describe it. Wilmer, New Ulm, and Worthington, and a little bit of history on. This is on residential homestead only for a $150,000 property. And if you look for Pay 2016, which we're talking about tonight, Marshall's would be at $633. Wilmer at $574, and you can see there's a huge change there. Why do you think there's that change? Up. Bond referendum is what the driver is on that in Wilmer. New Ulm at $737, and then Worthington at $622. Again, there's just the history of that comparison for residential homesteads. State property tax refunds. The state of Minnesota has two of those refund programs, and I think this is very important here. For help with forms and instructions, consult your tax professional. If you ever have a question, go to your tax professional, and you can also visit the Minnesota Department of Revenue website, www.taxes.state.mn.us. I know that I'm sure you're all going to rush home and get on that website. One of those tax refund program is the Minnesota Property Tax Rate Refund, aka Circuit Breaker Refund. That's been around since the 1970s. And then the Special Property Tax Refund. And this just kind of explains how that works. Again, here's the phone number for the Minnesota Department of Revenue. And then we have the Senior Citizen Property Tax Deferral. That's for a program of people 65 years and older with a household income of $60,000 less. An opportunity there for tax deferring. So, on December 21st, this would be the resolution that will come forward to you as school board members to approve 2015 tax levy payable in 2016 for the 16-17 school year of $6 million, $6,429,919.42, which again is a 6.06% increase. Comments or questions that you might have? Monica, any comments or questions?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? Okay.
He was 5 minutes quicker than last year.
Thank you for attending. I appreciate your diligence.
Well done. Board forum. Does the board have anything they'd like to bring up? School board goals.
Excuse me. Earlier this year, after a discussion, a pretty short one, but after a discussion and a recommendation, you folks approved basically providing safe, adequate facilities as one goal area, and also promoting the welfare of the district and all children through the political process at the state, local, and national level. At that time, I indicated that I would roll forward a draft or some ideas relative to action items in each of these two particular goal areas, which you have in front of you, hopefully, in the form of a memorandum. It's still a draft, but I believe that if we want the school board to be successful in their own development and to reach their goals, that the action items will lead to or can lead to that success. And as such, I guess I'd recommend that you approve those should you choose, or we can just leave them for informational purposes. And certainly before either one of those is done, perhaps you want to have some discussion about the action items underneath each of the goals.
You need to have people assigned to this, correct?
At some point in time, yes. My thought was that maybe review them at this meeting, ponder them a little bit, and if you wanted to have them as an action item on December 21st, which then theoretically you'd follow up with assigning different school board members, designating a legislative lead person, different things like that. Still open for suggestions.
I kind of like it. Anybody have any comments?
Well, I think these are good. I mean, there are a number of things in here that we're doing already, and I think this kind of reminds us to be accountable to that. It's good.
Any other comments?
One thing that I will say is first action item under the first school board performance action goal. Assign at least one school board member to be knowledgeable about challenges at each site, a quote-unquote resident expert, if you will. That's really focused on the facilities and I think it's hard for all of us to know everything there is to know about Parkside and Westside and the middle school, Maytech, and the high school. So having one or two board members who can be assigned, if you will, to Westside, for example, to know what are the challenges when it comes to facilities there, and just be able to serve as that additional knowledge resource, if you will, I think it could be beneficial. It's not about delving into the challenges of the flag doesn't look good every day or something like that. It's really focused on the safe and adequate facilities, just for clarification on that one.
Good. Moving on to our facilities update.
Excuse me, 4 things that I would say there. We're in the process of having general informational sort of preliminary staff meetings, which we've invited all of our staff to attend. We held one on December 1st. There was one this afternoon, and there is another one Thursday morning, I believe. We will also start tomorrow morning, I believe, Tricia, if I'm not mistaken, staff meetings at each building, where ATS&R will be out to meet with various staff members to start to get specific information and ideas about what does the concept at each site look like. We have a concept at Parkside right now. How do we fill in those details? And that is going to be most beneficial if we get input from our staff. So over the next 2 weeks, we'll be holding those, or Dave and Eric from ATS&R will be doing that. We've spent some time really, I think, adding to our process map and our checklist, if you will. Tricia and I spent about an hour the other day doing some really exciting things, like looking at statute and making sure we understand all the timelines that are involved, and highlighting the meetings that need to have formal school board action as we move forward. So I believe we have a meeting later this week, Bruce and Tricia and I do, to hopefully finalize that draft, and then we'll roll that out to the facilities committee in the very near future, and after that it will come forward to the full school board for review. So still a lot of work taking place as we anticipated in December, kind of behind the scenes, getting ready for the informational and educational campaign starting after the first of the year.
What's the response been to this? Any comments or about the plan, just generally?
No, I don't. Bruce and Tricia, well, Bruce has been at both of them so far. Some questions that have been really
Some
good
good
ones.
questions.
Some things that I think have driven some new actions for us to follow up on. But, Matt, those folks are in the building every day. They see our need for space. They see classrooms in smaller than adequate rooms, and offices in really smaller than adequate places. So I think they get it. I think they understand the need. But we're going to continue to make sure that we convey the need and the information that is available, and get that word out.
I attended the meeting today too, and that's good. I think there was only one question that came up from that team of people that relate to the pool.
Yeah.
Plans with that and program as a whole. So
I think they're just thinking everything through, and there's a lot of information that came forward in Scott's presentation, and I think they're just wanting to formulate how it all works and what the timeline is, and how is this going to affect my situation maybe at my building, and so on.
the information presented to them by Superintendent Linson has been very well.
Yeah.
Flow of it and description of everything, and kind of the whole process that's beginning to where we're at now and where we want to go. Very, very well.
Very good. Moving on to our second readings of policy 706 and 708. questions? Move on to an action item. This action item would be to approve the BPA assistant for 2015-16 school year. I'll make a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Excellent programs, grown tremendously. Any other discussion? Call for a vote. It is approved. Anything else for the good of the cause?